We begin with a special team coverage in Venezuela. Blackouts are continuing, and U.S. diplomats are preparing to leave as the situation grows more desperate. Sara Montes de Oca has the latest on the powerful crisis in the country. But first, we go to RT's Rachel Blevins outside the Venezuelan embassy to break down the diplomatic split. Rachel.
Scottie, the State Department has announced that it plans to withdraw all remaining diplomatic personnel from Venezuela following weeks of sanctions on the country. The announcement came from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and he said that it was in response to the deteriorating situation in Venezuela. He also claimed that to continue to keep any staff from the United States at the embassy was a constraint on U.S. policy. Now, following the Trump administration's decision to recognize opposition leader Juan Guaido in January, elected President Nicolas Maduro did order the United States to close its embassy in Caracas and to remove all of its diplomatic employees from the country. The U.S. initially responded by removing all non-essential employees from the embassy, but it did not close it and chose to keep it open in defiance of Maduro. However, tensions have changed in the face of a massive power outage that has impacted more than 80% of the country for the last 4 days, and it's really having crippling impacts on the citizens there. In response to Pompeo's announcement, Venezuela has announced that it is terminating official communication about the establishment of an interest section, and they are giving U.S. diplomatic personnel 72 hours to leave. So far, Venezuela has not called for its remaining diplomatic personnel in the United States to return home. However, this sudden call from the United States for all of their diplomatic personnel to come back from Venezuela has raised some serious questions about how the United States plans to proceed, as several officials continue to claim that all options are on the table. Scottie, back to you.
And now to explain how President Nicolas Maduro and his opposition are responding to issues with the country's power grid, we turn to RT's Sara Montes de Oca. Sara, Venezuela has experienced blackouts for a long time. This is nothing new, but this time it's different.
It's a lot bigger. It's the most massive one yet. Earlier today, Venezuela's chief prosecutor, Tarek William Saab, said he's launched an investigation into opposition leader Juan Guaido over suspicions that he was involved in the country's power grid attacks.
We asked the Supreme Court of Justice to place certain precautionary measures upon the citizen Juan Guaido, the opposition leader, in a public manner for disrespect, mocking the system of justice of Venezuela, mocking the Venezuelan democratic institutions. I want to highlight a revealing fact. How is it that only a few hours after this regrettable act, as we know, this electrical sabotage ever seen in the Republic's history, this citizen publishes on his Twitter account that I am going to read to you now. Venezuela is clear that light will arrive when the usurpation ends. Let's keep going.
He goes on to say that the timing of Guaido's tweet was just hours after the regrettable act took place. Even Forbes magazine speculated that it would be realistic for there to be some interference from the U.S. It's now day 5, and Venezuelans remain without power, and the humanitarian situation is growing. There are signs of the crisis everywhere. There have been several deaths reported due to the outage, leaving hospitals without power. However, that number has not yet been confirmed. Schools and public offices will remain closed until Wednesday. Venezuela's Congress declared a state of alarm due to the blackout. Now, this is the equivalent to a state of emergency. Venezuelan President Maduro continues to blame the U.S., calling it an electric war.
All of the options which are on the table are against Venezuela. And one of these options includes the electric war, the electric shock, and the cyber attack. If it is one of those options, and a high-tech cyber attack has been made against Venezuela, the United States of America is the only government with the technology capable of carrying out a high-tech cyber attack.
A Monday morning explosion at a power station in Caracas, like you see here, increased the hardship on the country. Flames rose from the electrical facility in the Baruta area of the capital, contributing to chaos among Venezuelans who are already struggling from hyperinflation. On Monday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo denied allegations that the U.S. was responsible for hacking Venezuela's energy system. He blamed the lack of maintenance and repair under Maduro's government. Pompeo also accused Russian oil giant Rosneft of defying U.S. sanctions by buying oil from PDVSA. Now, this was sanctioned back in January.
Russia's state-owned oil company, Rosneft, continues to purchase crude oil cargoes from PDVSA, Venezuela's state-owned oil company, in defiance of U.S. sanctions. And Rosneft's CEO, Igor Sechin, continues to throw a lifeline to the regime. Recently, Sechin ordered Rosneft to sell even more oil to the Maduro regime.
Rosneft denied the accusations and said Rosneft activities in Venezuela and oil supplies are conducted according to the international laws and existing contracts. The oil giant disputes the groundless accusations and said any contracts it has for oil purchasing were imposed in January prior to U.S. sanctions. Well, the Trump administration has placed sanctions on both Venezuela and Iran, which are two OPEC members. It doesn't look like the oil market is suffering. U.S. oil production has more than doubled over the past decade to an all-time high. U.S. output is now up at 12.1 million barrels per day, up more than 1 million from this time last year. And IHS Markit expects it to be up to 13 million by the end of this year. According to energy research from Rystad Energy, the U.S. is about to pass a new milestone. The U.S. now pumps more oil than any other country, including Russia and Saudi Arabia. Later this year, the U.S. will surpass Saudi Arabia in oil exports, natural gas liquids, and petroleum products like gasoline. Scottie, this has important national security implications. Now, this means the U.S. would no longer need to rely on foreign nations for oil. They can rely on oil pumped here at home.
We want to bring you on-the-ground coverage, and we bring in Lucas Koerner, who's an independent journalist and political analyst who is in Venezuela. He works for VenezuelanAnalysis.com. Thanks for joining us, Lucas.
Thanks for having me.
Well, obviously, there is technologically delays. There's all sorts of issues going through. When we reached out to you yesterday, this morning, actually, you were in the line for water. Tell us what exactly is going on the ground today with the citizens of Venezuela.
Sure. As of yesterday, power was finally restored to the western states of Mérida and Zulia, which were without power for almost 70 hours. So right as of now, all of the country's states have power, though in different parts there remains to be issues. So it's definitely not a uniform restoration of power. At the same time, in Caracas, given the power outage, the TUI pump system, which in the southeast of Caracas has been inoperational, and they're trying to bring it back online. So right now, at this time, there is not running water in Caracas, though the government says that within the next few hours, water will return. So I was in a line near my apartment where local community volunteers were distributing water. Again, important shows of solidarity. I think that contrary to the kind of narrative of this post-apocalyptic kind of Mad Max situation, while things have been very chaotic, definitely you have not seen great outbreaks of violence. There have been some isolated cases of looting, but largely things have been very calm in Caracas. And I think that if you were to compare, I was quite surprised in many other Latin American capitals, 2 days without electricity, you would see utter chaos. You would see looting throughout, serious issues of violence here, and let alone with an economic crisis like Venezuela's, things have been very calm.
Well, Lucas, yes, things are very, very calm. And this is a nation that is used to having power outages, not necessarily the water issues that they're facing today. Do you think, however, it is working in some form of changing the tone of people? Are people getting tired and fed up and looking for some sort of relief, regardless of whoever brings it? Is these kinds of activities actually working to persuade the people to one side of the opinion or the other?
I mean, without a doubt that, Venezuela is under siege right now. And, obviously, we don't know what was the cause of this power outage. Obviously, there are long-standing issues of underinvestment and lack of maintenance, though whether that itself caused the massive power outage remains to be determined. But sanctions have definitely played a role in debilitating Venezuela's electrical system, as the New York Times reported, preventing the backup generators from having enough fuel to power the system. And, definitely the economic crisis, which is very deep. And certainly, yes, there's a government responsibility for that mismanagement. But the U.S. sanctions, are definitely exacerbating that crisis and really increasing the suffering of the people here. And, in an attempt to, very explicitly from the mouths of Marco Rubio and Mike Pompeo to oust this guy and Juan Guaido, as you reported earlier, that there will be light when Maduro falls. So there definitely is a kind of a strangulation of the Venezuelan population in order to topple the government.
Yes, it's interesting who provides the rope for that strangulation, if they can actually be held accountable for it. So now we look at the the National Assembly yesterday approved a state of alarm. And while power, like you said, Caracas has mostly been restored, talk to me about the rest of the country outside of Caracas. What does this state of alarm mean for those on the ground there?
It's difficult to tell because power still in many areas has not been restored, so reports are just coming in. In Maracaibo in the west on the border with Colombia, there was much more widespread looting, and there was definitely more instability there. But largely, we don't know what is the issue with the health situation in the hospitals. So far, as of Sunday evening, NGO Doctors for Health reported around 21 deaths in hospitals, which contradicted the opposition's claim of over 70. We haven't seen official figures, so definitely life remains, very challenging with, lack of access to electricity and water. Though it's important to recognize that Venezuelans, these are long-standing problems of difficulties of accessing both water and periodic blackouts, particularly in the west of the country. So there is definitely Venezuelans are used to these situations and are very resilient in confronting them.
Lucas, how are the Venezuelans able to get their news right now? Obviously, there's a lot of hurdles they have to overcome. Are they trying to get as much news as possible? Are they paying attention? But more importantly, how are they able to access news right now? Is it via the phones? Is it via radio? Where are most Venezuelans paying attention to?
Well, with beginning on the period of Thursday through Friday, there was a total national blackout in which no one could get any news. But following that, with the restoration of power in most of the country, all through social media, through television, radio, all the normal media are functioning, and Venezuelans are able to get their news. And there's a Venezuela, contrary to the establishment kind of perspective that Venezuela is a dictatorship and there's only pro-government channels. Or actually, the most watched channels in Venezuela are pro-opposition channels, anti-government channels. Likewise, social media tends to be much more anti-government. So there definitely is a wide spectrum of opinions in the media in Venezuela.
Well, going forward, are you seeing things start to get a little bit better? Is any relief that's supposedly being provided by various countries to Venezuela, is it actually getting to the ground? Are people actually getting at least some sort of help in some way?
Well, we're seeing the government is commissioning tankers to provide water to hospitals and other institutions. And I mean, likewise, we saw that the Russian government was delivering aid and medicine as of a few weeks ago. And then there's been other efforts with the European Union to negotiate a multi-billion-dollar aid package, so that has not been completely confirmed. So they're definitely, and again, it's important to note that the UN and the International Red Cross and other international humanitarian organizations maintain ongoing missions here using official channels, not attempting to force humanitarian aid in a way that politicizes it in an attempt to oust the government, as the United States attempted on February 23rd, and the United Nations and the Red Cross denounced, along with many other human rights organizations. Well,
thank you so much, Lucas, for your continuing coverage and your continuing diligence there in the streets of Caracas.
Hey YouTube, thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this last video. We have a ton more great content just like this for you. So if you want more, make sure you go ahead and subscribe. And remember, never stop questioning more.